The invitation came on a Post-it note, yellow, slightly crumpled at one corner, stuck to the lid of my lunch container like it had been placed there, with intention, and then pressed down one extra time to make sure it couldn't escape. I opened it in the break room at 12:17 on a Wednesday, and the note stared back at me like a dare. The handwriting was small and deliberate, the kind that looks casual but isn't. It said, "Will you be my date this weekend? There's a gala. You'd need a suit. Say yes, no signature. Just a small drawing of what I think was supposed to be a bow tie." I stood there holding my lunch container and staring at that Post-it for longer than any grown man should stand anywhere staring at anything. Long enough that the microwave beeped twice and then gave up on being acknowledged. Long enough that someone behind me opened the fridge and closed it again, and I didn't move. And then my phone buzzed. A text from my son's school. Parent callback requested. Recess incident. I put the note in my pocket, took my lunch out, and went back to being a father, which is the thing that interrupts everything else about my life with absolute impunity. That's how it started. With a Post-it note and a crooked bow tie drawing and a school that needed me on the phone, which is, I think, an accurate summary of the last 4 years of my existence. My name is Callum Adiemi Pierce. My son is Kian, he's 7 years old, and he has my mother's eyes and his mother's laugh and a philosophical relationship, with authority that has kept his teachers and me in a state of ongoing negotiation since kindergarten. His mother, Maris, moved to Vancouver 2 years ago, not because she doesn't love him. She does. In the way some people love things they can't be near without losing themselves. Maris is a person who was always going to go somewhere far away, and I knew that when we met, and I loved her anyway. And there isn't a clean feeling about any of it, just the layered, complicated thing that it actually is. Kian lives with me full time. He sees Maris on school breaks. They FaceTime on Thursday evenings, and she sends him books that are too advanced for him, which he keeps on his shelf in order of height and considers very impressive. We are doing okay, he and I. We are doing better than okay, most days. We have a routine that runs like a slightly dented machine. Breakfast, school, work, pickup, homework, dinner, the battle about screen time, the longer battle about bedtime, and then the 45 minutes after he falls asleep that are mine and that I use, mostly to sit in the kitchen and drink tea, and decompress from the 45 minutes before. I worked at Velleman Hart Studio, a mid-sized architecture firm on Pemberton Street that specialized in adaptive reuse projects, turning old industrial buildings into housing and community spaces. It's work I genuinely believe in, which matters because I've given it a lot. I was a project manager. I'd been there 6 years. The firm had about 60 employees and the kind of culture that prided itself on being flat and collaborative while still, under the surface, running on very traditional hierarchies, the kind every architecture firm runs on even when it pretends it doesn't. I knew my place in it. I wasn't unhappy. I was tired. There's a difference. The Post-it was from a woman named Zoe. Her full name was Zola Marcelli Okafor. She worked 2 floors up from me in what I understood to be some kind of senior advisory capacity that I'd never quite pinned down. She had an office with a glass wall that she kept the blinds on, which at a company where everyone else sat in open plan felt either very senior or very mysterious. I decided it was probably both. She'd been at Velleman Hart about 8 months. In that time, I'd spoken to her maybe a dozen times, at the coffee station, in the elevator, once in a long side conversation during an all-hands meeting where someone tried to praise urban renewal without acknowledging displacement. And Zoe had calmly, politely dismantled the language with specific examples and a look that said, words matter because people live inside them. She was around my age, mid-30s. She wore her hair in a low puff most days and had the habit of taking her glasses off and folding them when she was about to say something she'd thought through very carefully. She laughed loudly and without self-consciousness, which I noticed because it's rare, that kind of freedom in a laugh. I had been, in the cautious and contained way available to a single father with approximately 45 minutes of personal life per day, interested in her. I had not done anything about that interest. I had a son. I had a job. I had laundry. The Post-it changed the math. The recess incident turned out to be Kian defending a kid named Ezra who was being told, loudly by 2 other boys, that he talked weird and should go back to baby class. Kian had responded by telling them, with the calm certainty of a small philosopher, that they were being idiots. And when they didn't accept this feedback, he had shoved one of them. Not hard enough. I got the call on speaker, leaned against the wall in the hallway outside the break room, and listened to his teacher's careful tone. Then I listened to Kian when she handed him the phone. "Dad?" he said, as if calling me from the inside of a tiny courtroom. "I don't regret it." I closed my eyes. "Kian," I said, "we don't push." "They were mean." "I know." And Ezra looked like he wanted to disappear. That sentence, "looked like he wanted to disappear," hit me somewhere deep and ugly. Because I know that look. I've worn it. "I'm glad you stood up for him," I said. "But we find words first. We use hands last." Kian made a thoughtful sound like he was reviewing policy. "Okay," he said. "But sometimes words are slow." "Then we practice making them faster," I said. His teacher took the phone back, thanked me for being engaged, told me there would be a conversation about hands, and that was the end of it. I went back into the break room, sat down with my lunch, and felt the Post-it in my pocket like a small burning thing. "Will you be my date this weekend?" "There's a gala. Say yes." It was ridiculous. It was also, annoyingly, exactly the kind of interruption I hadn't allowed into my life for a long time. I found Zoe at the coffee station the next morning, Thursday. Early, before most people had arrived, she was standing sideways to the counter, reading something on her phone, coffee untouched beside her like she hadn't needed the caffeine to be awake. She looked up when I walked in with the kind of expression that was ready for me. "The note," I said. "The note," she agreed, calm as a person who wasn't terrified she'd crossed a boundary. "How did you know which lunch container was mine?" "You have a dinosaur on yours." She said it with complete seriousness, which made it worse because it was true. "I do have a dinosaur on mine. It's a sticker Kian put there 2 years ago, and it has never occurred to me to remove it because the container is fine, and Kian would notice, and that would become a conversation I don't have energy for." "What kind of gala?" I asked. "Boring kind," she said. She poured her coffee like she was doing something inevitable. "Architecture awards, sponsors, donors, a room full of people who say vibrancy when they mean money. I have to go." "I don't want to go alone. You're someone I actually want to talk to," which is not a low bar, but it is the relevant one. "You could have just asked," I said, out loud, like a regular person. She considered this. "The Post-it was more interesting," she said. It was. It absolutely was. "I have a son," I told her. "He's 7. I'd need to arrange Saturday night," she said immediately. "Starts at 7. You'd be home by 11. I stared at her. "You've done the math." "I do a lot of math," she said, like it was a personality trait and a warning. She picked up her coffee, her phone, and a folder that looked too thin to contain anything unimportant. "Think about it," she said. "Let me know by Friday." She walked away like she hadn't just placed a small live grenade into my week. I spent the rest of Thursday trying not to think about it, which is what you do when you're actually thinking about something constantly. By Friday morning, I had reached that particular emotional cliff where you either say yes, or you admit you're afraid of your own life. So I said yes, also via Post-it. I drew a suit that was less recognizable as a suit than she might have hoped. At 3 p.m., Zoe appeared at the edge of my cubicle partition, looked at my drawing and said with great kindness, "I see you tried." Then she smiled that loud laugh smile without actually laughing, and my chest did an annoying little thing. I found a suit. It was the one I wore to my cousin's wedding in 2021, charcoal gray, slightly conservative, still fit, which felt like a small victory, and also a reminder that my life had not contained many occasions worth dressing up for. I called my neighbor Preethi. Preethi is a graduate student in urban planning who sometimes watches Kian for me in exchange for me occasionally helping her move furniture or fix a cabinet hinge. She said yes instantly, the way people in their late 20s say yes before adulthood has fully convinced them to guard their energy. Kian accepted the information with great satisfaction because Preethi lets him stay up 30 minutes later than I do and pretends she doesn't know that he knows. Saturday at 6:30 p.m., I picked Zoe up at her apartment building on Dalrymple Street, one of those converted warehouse buildings, with high ceilings and original casement windows, the kind my firm would have called significant and put into a glossy brochure. She met me in the lobby wearing a deep burgundy dress and her hair, different from usual, down and loose, and I stood there in that lobby and had one very clear thought. I was not prepared for this. She looked at my suit and said, "You did good." "The wedding was in 2021, I said. She laughed, loud, unguarded, free, and pushed through the door to the street like the night was already hers. I followed her out into the evening. The gala was at the Peregrine Center, the old municipal theater on Hargrove, avenue that had been restored about 10 years ago and now rented itself out for events at prices I didn't want to calculate. Red carpet, photographers, a step and repeat. Banner with the names of sponsors I mostly recognized. Because in this city, development money has the same handwriting everywhere. Zoe moved through the entrance with the comfort of practice. I followed close, half a step behind, which I didn't love but couldn't help because the room had that particular energy. Expensive confidence, polished teeth, people greeting each other with warmth that didn't quite reach their eyes. So I said, "What does it fund?" Something softened in her face. Adaptive reuse projects in under-resourced neighborhoods, housing, community spaces, sometimes schools. The kind of work developers avoid because the margin isn't sexy. The exact kind of work I'd spent 6 years doing. "You're not an advisor," I said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a sentence arriving. Zoe's eyes held mine. "Why do you say that?" "Because advisors don't have foundations named after them," I said. "Because 3 people approached you tonight like you were a fact, not a colleague. Because you have your own office with blinds down. Because a host just asked you about a main table, like you were an option she needed to manage." Zoe turned her wine glass slowly in her hand. "I'm an advisor to Velleman Hart," she said carefully, "which is one of the firms the foundation has funded. And yes, I have other interests." "How many other interests?" I asked. Zoe inhaled once, like she was choosing the cleanest way to tell the truth. "I run a company," she said. "A company?" "A development and investment company," she clarified. "Marcelli Capital. We fund and develop urban renewal projects. We operate in 11 cities." She paused, then added, with a small, almost amused edge, "We are not a small company." I thought about the way people had greeted her. The main table question, the building on Dalrymple Street, the deliberate modesty that only wealth can afford. "Why are you at Velleman Hart?" I asked. "Honestly." Zoe's fingers tightened slightly on her glass. "Because I was tired," she said simply. "I've been running Marcelli Capital for 4 years since my parents died. Before that, I was learning to run it while my father ran it and was dying slowly, which we didn't discuss directly because he was a particular kind of Yoruba man who believed direct discussion of mortality was unnecessary." There was humor in her voice, but it didn't hide the exhaustion underneath. "I needed to do the actual work for a while," she continued. "To sit in rooms where buildings get designed, not just where money gets moved. I needed to remember what the whole thing is for." I stared at her. Then, because my mouth has never been good at staying quiet when my brain is busy, I said the post-it note was strategic. Zoe's eyes flicked to mine. "How so?" "You didn't want me to know who you were first," I said. "Because if I knew, I wouldn't have come." Zoe held that for a beat. Then she said, "You seemed like someone who would talk yourself out of it if the ask had any weight behind it." She was right. I would have. I would have built a tower of practical reasons and called it maturity when it was actually fear. "Smart," I said. "I do a lot of math," she said again, like a refrain and a confession. We left at 10:30, slightly ahead of schedule, which she orchestrated with the smooth efficiency of someone accustomed to managing exits from rooms full of expectations. Outside, the evening had cooled. Photographers still hovered near the entrance. Zoe angled us down half a block before she exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath since we arrived. "Okay," she said, "done." "You don't like them," I said. "I like what they fund," Zoe replied. "I don't like being photographed." She glanced at me, and for the first time that night, her voice shifted into something more vulnerable. "Does any of this—" She started, then stopped. Then more carefully. "I was not trying to mislead you. I just didn't want our first conversation to be about Marcelli Capital." "What did you want it to be about?" I asked. "Fenestration," she said. "And the fact that you have a dinosaur on your lunch container." I laughed, and it came out unexpectedly warm. We got tea from a place on Merchant Street that was still open and sat on a bench facing the old rail yard. Dark. Quiet, waiting. My firm had a proposal in for that site. A mixed-use community development. Ground floor retail. Workforce housing. A community garden on the roof. It had been my project for 8 months. I told Zoe about it the way I don't usually get to tell people. From the beginning. From why it mattered, not just what it was. I told her about the neighborhood meetings. The older residents who looked at us like we were selling them. A future they might not get to live in. The spreadsheets. The design compromises. The nights I sat at my kitchen table after Kian fell asleep. Rechecking numbers like that could change the world. Zoe listened with her glasses off, folded in her hand. When I finished, she said quietly, "That's the kind of project we fund." "I know that now," I said. "I didn't bring you tonight to pitch you," she said. "I know that too." The rail yard sat there like a big rectangle of possibility. And in the space between us, something settled. Not romance, not yet. Something more foundational. Respect. Then Zoe said, "Tell me about your son." So I told her about Kian, the negotiating with authority, the dinosaur sticker, the FaceTime calls on Thursdays, the books arranged by height, the 30 minutes of extra screen time Preeti grants as a matter of quiet policy, the morning routine, which involves a negotiation about socks that I lose more often than I win, the afternoon he asked me out of nowhere in the car whether he was going to have a stepmother someday, how I told him I didn't know, how he said okay and went back to looking out the window, how that okay occupied a corner of my mind for 2 weeks. Zoe listened to all of it like it mattered. "Do you think you wanted him to say yes?" she asked gently. To the stepmother question. I thought about it. "I think I wanted to hear him want something," I said. "Anything specific. Because sometimes I can't tell what he needs. And I'm just making my best guesses and hoping the guesses land." Zoe nodded slowly. "My father used to say parenting and running a company are the same thing," she said. "You have incomplete information. The stakes are extremely high. And anyone who tells you they know exactly what they're doing is performing confidence. They don't entirely feel." "Your father built Marcelli Capital," I said. "He did," Zoe said. "With my mother. She did the legal and structural side. He did the relationships. By the time I came into it, it was already something. Then it became mine to grow or ruin." "Which did you do?" I asked. Zoe's smile turned a fraction sharper. "Both," she said, simultaneously. "For about 2 years. Then gradually more growth and less ruin." I laughed. Zoe laughed. And in that moment, she didn't feel like a powerful person from a gala. She felt like a tired human being who was trying. We walked back to her building the long way, through the part of the neighborhood where the old garment district had been. We passed a brick warehouse from 1932 with arched windows, a building I had project managed personally 4 years ago. Zoe stopped outside it and looked up at the facade with the expression of someone who actually understands what she's seeing. "This one's good," she said. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it in that particular way. The way you mean it when the compliment comes from someone who has the context to know what they're looking at. At her building, Zoe stopped at the door and said, "Would Kian be opposed to a park at some point? With an objective adult present who is not a teacher or a parent?" "You want to meet my son?" I said. "I want to know if my instinct about you is correct," she said. "Kids haven't learned to present yet. They're honest by accident." I stared at her. "That's a sophisticated way to vet a person," I said. Zoe's mouth curved. "I told you," she said. "I do a lot of math." 3 weeks later, on a Sunday afternoon, we were at Reardon Park, the one with the good climbing structure, the one with the fountain Kian has complicated feelings about. Zoe arrived with a bag holding 2 bottles of water, an apple, and a book she'd mentioned, once in passing, that she thought Kian might actually like. Not too advanced. Just right. A novel about a kid who solves city infrastructure problems like a detective. I didn't even know books like that existed. Zoe handed it to Kian without ceremony as we sat down on a bench. Kian looked at the cover, then at Zoe, then he said, "Do you know if the water main pressure systems in this book are accurate?" That word, honesty, landed in my kitchen like something solid. Because the truth is, I've spent years being careful. Careful not to need too much. Careful not to want too loudly. Careful not to make my life dependent on anyone who might leave. Honesty requires a kind of courage that carefulness doesn't. The Marcelli Capital piece came out more gradually after that. Not as a reveal. As context. 11 cities became a clearer picture. Active developments, community partnerships, a team big enough to require systems. The foundation, which I'd assumed was a nice philanthropic side thing, had granted sums large, enough to reshape neighborhoods, when used well and destroy them when used badly. Zoe talked about that with a seriousness I didn't expect. "Money is a tool," she said once, stirring her tea. "People act like it's a personality. It's not. It's just leverage. The question is who it serves." I didn't feel small in relation to her world, and that mattered. I didn't feel small because Zoe didn't make me small, and because I had enough sense of my own work to know the project Manager inside the building and the investor outside. The building are not in competition. They're in a chain. Every link matters. The rail yard proposal did eventually get approved. The City Planning Commission meeting lasted 3 hours. I attended via video because I had school pickup. When the approval came through, my principal, a woman named Agatha Fernsby, 30 years in architecture, not easily surprised, called me into her office and said, "With no preamble, you're dating Zola Martelli Okafor." "Yes," I said. Agatha looked at me for a long beat. Then she said, "Good for you." She said it like she meant it, which is the only way Agatha says anything. 2 months into design phase, Marcelli Capital came in as a co-investor on the project. Zoe and I discussed conflict of interest with embarrassing seriousness. We talked to lawyers. We documented boundaries. We made sure decisions weren't made in my kitchen over tea. I wasn't naive. I wasn't going to become a cautionary tale. Zoe didn't want that either. She had spent too long cleaning up other people's messy stories to create her own. Kian finished the infrastructure detective novel in 6 days. He gave it 4 stars. From him, that is high praise. He said the water main pressure systems were mostly accurate, but the author had clearly not consulted anyone about PSI. Requirements for high-rise buildings, and this was a missed opportunity. Zoe read his review. He'd written it unprompted in a small notebook and sent him a book about bridge engineering. He started it the same night. On a Tuesday morning, about 5 months after the gala, I opened my lunch container in the break room. Same container, same dinosaur, and found a post-it note on the lid. Same handwriting, small, deliberate, slightly crumpled at one corner, like it had been folded, unfolded, and chosen anyway. It said, "I think this is working. Do you think this is working? Draw your answer." I stared at it and felt something like warmth and fear at the same time. Because working is not a word I'm used to applying to my personal life. Projects work. Schedules work. Systems work. People are harder. I took a pen and did what she asked. I drew a small figure meant to be me on the park bench, watching. I drew a small figure meant to be Kian, leaning forward, explaining something with his hands like the idea was too big for his mouth. I drew a small figure across from him, glasses off, listening. Then I did something I didn't usually do. I didn't overthink it. I didn't revise it. I didn't try to make it impressive. I folded the note and went upstairs. Zoe's office blinds were up now most days. I left the drawing on her door. That evening, she texted me 3 words. "Yeah, that's right." I put my phone down and went back to the kitchen, to my 45 minutes, to the quiet that is mine. But it was a different quiet than it used to be. It had more possibility in it. It had the weight of something I was choosing, not just surviving. From down the hall, Kian called out, "Dad, can water mains freeze?" "In cold climates," I called back. "Why?" "Research," he said. I made my tea. I thought about a woman with her glasses off listening to my son like he mattered, with the patient attention of someone who had decided to be present and meant it. The post-it note. The bow tie drawing. 70 words on a yellow square and everything that came after. I am not a man who believed in signs. I believe in decisions, in choices made slowly and with information, in the daily, unglamorous work of showing up. But I also believe that sometimes the smallest thing, a note on a lunch container, a crumpled corner, a crooked bow tie, becomes the specific door through which your life decides to go somewhere new. I said yes to that door. I would say yes again. I took a glass of wine from a tray and did what I always do in unfamiliar rooms. I mapped exits, faces, power lines. I recognized a few people. Firm partners, city planning officials, a couple of developers whose names appear on buildings I had personally helped design. Zoe seemed to know more people than I would have expected for someone 8 months into an advisory role. And people didn't approach her the way they approach someone they know from a conference. They approached her the way people approach someone they need to acknowledge. A man from Del Vecchio Capital shook her hand with both of his and said, "Zola, good to see you. We should connect about Harborview Phase 2. A woman from the city's planning commission touched Zoe's arm and said her name with the warm familiarity of someone who has shared real rooms with her. Not networking rooms, but decision rooms. At about 8 p.m., the host, a woman in a silver blazer, who looked like she ran the event with an iron spine, came over and asked Zoe quietly if she still wanted to be seated at the main table. Zoe, also quietly, said she was fine where she was. I watched the host's posture shift in that subtle way that tells you you've just heard a hierarchy being negotiated. When the woman walked away, I said, Main table? Zoe took a sip of wine. They like to seat donors up front. You're a donor. She said. She didn't elaborate. I didn't push. Not because I wasn't curious. Because I was trying to be the kind of man who doesn't claw at information like it's proof of his worth. We went back to talking about the project on the screen behind the stage. Community center, conversion in a formerly industrial neighborhood. Zoe had opinions about the fenestration choices that were specific and annoyingly correct. She talked about light like it was a moral issue, which in some neighborhoods it is. The awards ran about 40 minutes. One of the major prizes, the Urban Impact Award, which came with a grant large, enough to actually change a project's trajectory, was sponsored by a foundation whose name didn't register at first. Then I read it again. The Marceli Okafor Foundation. I glanced at Zoe. She was watching the stage with the neutral expression of someone watching something she'd seen before. Your foundation, I said quietly. Zoe turned her head toward me. Not defensive, not apologetic, just present. Yes, she said. The Marceli Okafor Foundation. My parents' names, she said. My mother was Italian-American. My father was Nigerian. They both died within the same year, 3 years ago. The foundation is the thing I could think of to do that felt right. I didn't say I'm sorry. She looked like a woman who had received that phrase many times and already filed it where it belonged. Zoe's face went perfectly serious, like she'd been asked a question of enormous importance. That, she said, is an excellent question. Kian's eyes narrowed with interest. I think some authors lie. Zoe nodded. Some do. What do you already know about water main pressure systems? And my 7-year-old began to explain municipal water infrastructure to a woman who ran an 11-city development company. And she listened, glasses off, folded in her hand, like she was being taught something worth knowing. I watched them from the bench and felt something in my chest loosen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. I thought about Maris in Vancouver and complicated love. I thought about my 45 minutes after bedtime and the tea in the kitchen. I thought about the post-it note with the crooked bow tie. And I didn't think about 11 cities. I mean that. Those things mattered. They were part of who Zoe was. But they were not what I was thinking about while she listened to my son with the patience of someone who had decided to be present and meant it. Kian wasn't performing. Zoe had been right about that. He hadn't learned to present yet. He was just himself, negotiator, philosopher, boy who arranges books by height. And he had decided, in the 30 minutes since she handed him that novel, that she was a person worth talking to. He does not decide that easily. His instincts, I have learned over 7 years, are better than mine. On the walk back to the car, Kian walked slightly ahead of us the way he does when he's thinking, hands in his pockets. Zoe walked beside me and said quietly, he's going to be someone. He already is someone, I said. Zoe glanced at me. You know what I mean, I did. And I also meant what I said. Both things were true. It took us another 2 months to have the direct conversation about what this was. Not because we were playing games. Because both of us had lived enough life to know that naming something changes it. Changes expectations. Changes stakes. And stakes, when you have a child, are not theoretical. We had the conversation on a Tuesday. Night in my kitchen while the kettle warmed, and Kian slept down the hall, and the apartment held that thin quiet that feels like borrowed time. Zoe said, I've never done this with someone who has a child, and I'm not pretending I fully understand what that means yet. I respected her immediately for saying it out loud. Most people perform confidence around children. Zoe didn't. I said, I haven't tried to do this at all in 2 years, and I'm carrying some things from the last time that I'm still sorting through. Zoe's eyes softened. I know, she said. I can see you sorting. Is that alarming? I asked. Zoe shook her head. No, she said. It looks like honesty.